You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, you're in luck. Longtime Democratic strategist and incredibly productive polymath Simon Rosengerg is here. In addition to, right? Yeah, I mean, that's true, right? It's Simon. There's nothing to do with it. It's absolutely right. In addition to being consistently spot on in reading the political moment, Simon's a talented writer, a savvy entrepreneur, a tireless fighter for democratic values, and his latest effort is one of the best uses of the Substack platform imaginable. He created Hopium Chronicles, which you have to join. It's a newsletter, a community. It's full of resources that'll help you do your job, everybody, this election cycle. Simon, welcome back.
Edwin, it's great to be here, and I'm certainly going to take this recording and play it for my family, I think, later today. But thank you so much.
You bet. Well, could you take a couple minutes and introduce everybody to what you're doing over at Hopium? Tell them how they can participate and the kinds of fabulous resources you make available.
No, I appreciate it. And, I think like a lot of your listeners, in 2022, I decided that I needed to be doing more. I needed to be making a bigger contribution. That the threat to our democracy was so significant that even though I'm in the business professionally and have been, I was working at a think tank. There was limitations on speech due to my tax status. I couldn't be terribly partisan. And so I needed to find a vehicle that would allow me to be more effective at battling MAGA. And also, I had met a lot of people in the last couple of years in the work I've been doing, and I wanted to be more connected to them. And so I've moved my work. I shut down a think tank that I've been running for many years to moved all my work to Substack. It's a powerful new platform. It uses audio and video and text. It's very interwoven and very powerful. I think it's a very powerful way to connect with information, but it's also got great community tools. And I think the thing that's most exciting to me is the kind of community discussion that goes on every day, how people are helping each other, learn how to volunteer, what races to get involved in, sharing ideas, learning from one another. And that's really been very gratifying for me. I mean, I feel very, as I joke with my family, I've got 20,000 new friends, and they're great people, and I love hanging out with them.
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't even have the language to talk yet about how Substack works, but the sharing vertical that you have is fabulous. Just people talking about what they're doing to help the democracy. It's really optimism generating.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I could say to your listeners, the whole idea here, we call it Hopium Chronicles. Hopium was used as a slur against me in 2022 because I was smoking hopium about the Democratic Party's chances, but I turned out to be correct, right, in my assessment of what was going to happen in the election. And I like to think that hopium is hope with a plan. That in 2022, we just didn't hope the election was going to get better. We put our heads down, we went to work, and we changed history. I mean, the work that we did together, millions of proud patriots, people who love their country, who decided they're not going to let their democracy slip away, went to work and made this election in 2022 far better than it would have been otherwise. We raised more money than people could believe. We had more volunteers. And there's this awakening that's happened in America, this citizen activism that I'm really trying to help connect with, because I think it's the most powerful thing we have as Democrats today. It's just regular people going to work, fighting to make sure their democracy doesn't slip away.
You've made that point, and I was last week. One of my guests made a similar point in a different way. He was talking about how, for a long time, Democrats focused on rights, and the Supreme Court was a protector of all our rights. The Supreme Court has opted not to be that anymore, and it's a moment for Democrats to go back to something we used to do, which is to say focus on social progress and equality more broadly, and stop outsourcing all our work to the lawyers, but build the kinds of coalitions that we built 100 years ago that really changed America in dramatic and better ways. And I see I see that starting now, whether you care about abortion or you care about the environment or you care about guns or you care about the democracy itself or you care about civil rights, these vastly different sort of goals. Everybody's coming together to form a wonderful coalition to move the country forward.
Well, and I agree with you, and I do think that I like the way that you described it. I think that we have become overly reliant on lawyers for a lot of things in our politics, frankly, and on the Democratic side. And I think that part of what happened, Edwin, is that the barrier to entry for a regular person into politics has been lowered. I mean, you can now, sit on a Zoom with someone like me and James Carville or whomever your favorite politician is, while you're making dinner at night and listening to them talk. Many of these groups that I speak to have weekly meetings, right, where they have prominent Democrats speaking to them over Zoom. And what's happened is this use of Zoom has allowed hundreds of thousands or even millions of people to get far more connected to the political discourse, to political activism in a way that is meaningful to them. And then what's also happened is that we now have this remote texting and phone calling technology, which allows you, to live in California, but to make GOTV calls into Pennsylvania and Michigan. These things were never possible before. And so some of this is that there's been sort of a change in the way that an average citizen can get engaged. And what's happening is people like it. They feel it's gratifying. They feel like big citizens. They feel like they're making their country better. And they're devoting more and more time to this rather than doing other things, right? I mean, we all have a lot of things we could be doing with our lives, like coaching Little League and making dinner and all the things that we do that are important to us. But what's happened is a whole lot of people have decided that this is their most important activity, and it's really made a huge difference. And it's also very kind of small d, democratic, de Tocquevillian, right? And one of the things I like to say is that our politics is getting more democratic, small d democratic, more consistent with the values of our party, while the Republican Party, by the way, has become far more dependent on large contributions, a small number of people, and it's become really a politics of oligarchy. And so I think the way the two parties have organized their politics has now become deeply consistent with their actual values in the political arena, which is that we're relying on everyday people to win our elections, and they're relying on 100 oligarchs. And our way of doing it is better. And it's one of the reasons that we're winning, because it's more consistent with the vision and the understanding of what our country should be. And I think we are far more, I don't think the comparisons between our two parties any longer on their commitment to the traditional understanding of American democracy, it's not even a close call anymore, right?
No. When you think that the Republican Party, which birthed here in the upper Midwest and put Lincoln as their first guy on the ballot here in my city, was the politics of we're going to preserve a democracy and fight to do it when people want to dictate to the whole country by using this fake idea of popular sovereignty, right? And then secession. And that same party is now the party. Let me say this differently. I read about the recommendation of the grand jury that hasn't happened, but they recommended indicting Lindsey Graham and two former senators as part of the plot to overturn the election in Georgia. And I read it and I was heartbroken. It just made me so sad to think that one of the two great political parties in history, but it happened to be an American political party, is now dedicated to destroying democracy. On behalf of interests that the public doesn't want, on behalf of fossil fuels and some religious minority that really wants to control everything. It just is heartbreaking.
Listen, I wrote something consistent with what you were saying yesterday, and what I reminded my readers was that the party that is known for Lincoln and freeing the slaves, and for Reagan, who helped end the Cold War, is now also going to be known as the party that tried to end American democracy forever. This is now forever part of the Republican story, and what it is, because the effort to overturn the election in 2016 2020 and 2021 was a party-wide effort. It involved hundreds of party leaders all across the country. Over 1,000 people have already been successfully prosecuted. The next 200 to 300 people who are going to be prosecuted, whether federally or in the states, are going to be Republican leaders like Lindsey Graham, like Ronna Romney McDaniel, who is likely to get prosecuted at some point because she's on camera, telling everybody that she actually worked to recruit those fake electors. I mean, she's admitted under oath that she was a major participant in this illicit scheme to overturn the election and end American democracy. And I do think that part of what happened in the last 6 to 8 weeks is the enormity and the gravity of all this is starting to sort of settle in, right? To people who study this stuff daily, the people who are analysts on this. Jack Smith and his prosecution of Trump, 3 of the 4 charges involved the word conspiracy, right? He established that there was a vast conspiracy. People who participated in the conspiracy at whatever level broke the law. And so what is likely now is there could be years and years of prosecutions of very prominent people. Lindsey Graham's not out of the woods. He's out of the woods today. Doesn't mean he doesn't get prosecuted a year from now, 2 years from now, because there's already been a grand jury recommendation that he get indicted. I mean, that is now a permanent part of Lindsey Graham's life, whether he ends up getting prosecuted or not. So all of these Republican leaders have extraordinary legal exposure. But the key is the thing that you said, Edwin, and I just want to repeat it, which is the awful, terrible reality now that we have that one of our 2 political parties has essentially seceded from American democracy, that they're no longer believe in the foundational principles of this country. They're contemptuous of democratic laws and norms. They're challenging them in every possible way all the time. And they essentially are no longer part of the democratic West. And so I think there's already been sort of a soft secession that's already taken place, not a geographic one, but an ideological one. And it is, and we have to recognize that threat, that the Republicans, the attempt to overturn the election in 2021, was probably the most serious threat to American democracy in our history. And we cannot in any way normalize this, put lipstick on this pig, right? Like whatever the phrase is, we have to stare at this, as powerfully as we can and speak the truth to our fellow Americans about what this party has become and what the threat is. And I think this is going to become, it's been the most important. MAGA, the fear of MAGA has been the most powerful issue in our politics in 2018, 2020, and 2022. It's going to be the most powerful issue in 2024 because I joke that Joe Biden's pitch to voters is going to be, hey, I've worked really hard. I made the country better. We're better off. I still got a bunch of things I want to do. If you elect me, here are the things I'm going to do. Donald Trump's pitch is going to be, I tried really hard to end American democracy last time, and if you elect me, I'll get it done this time, right? I mean, literally, that's going to be the choice in front of us. Some version of that is going to be the actual choice that we have in 2024. And it's why I'm confident at the end of the day that we're going to win this election, hopefully win big, and have the story of this election be a massive repudiation of MAGA so that MAGA's grip on the Republican Party starts to loosen.
So there's so much to unpack in this. The legal system is slow, right? So bringing the last crop and the leaders to justice will take years, as you said, well past the next election. You and I we both lean to the progressive side on policy, but I think both of us welcome policy arguments with people who lean right of center, but love our country, just have different ideas about how to move us forward. So this really is less about, this current crowd. I watched the Republican debate. There are no policy ideas. There are none.
Yeah.
This is not what this is about anymore. So, I don't know if conservatives in America who love our country and love our democracy can take back the Republican Party from the guys they gave it to. They may have to start a new party.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because given that you evoked the origins of the Republican Party a few minutes ago, right, there are a couple of interesting challenges here. I mean, if we were in a parliamentary system, what would have already happened is that the Liz Cheney Never Trump or Never MAGA wing, would have folded into the Biden coalition. She would have been in the cabinet, right? So Bill Kristol may have gone into the cabinet, and we would have picked up 6, 7, 8% of the electorate, and we would be up in the mid-50s, and we would be ahead in this election by 10, points or more. But our system doesn't work that way, and so but I think that we have to temporarily, as Democrats, imagine that we have to do that, create that kind of pro-democracy coalition with the Never Trump and Never MAGAs in some kind of formal/informal way, right? We have to make them welcome in our family. They're on our side temporarily. I mean, I did podcast this week with Reed Galen and Joe Walsh, two former Republicans who are virulently anti-Trump and anti-MAGA, right? And I do it in part because just like I went on Fox News for 17 years and I wasn't paid, I wanted to demonstrate that Republicans and Democrats could have civil conversations on air. It was very important to me, right? And so I think keeping this dialogue open, as you're describing, and building this large pro-democracy majority coalition is really important. But the challenge that we have is if you look at the latest Morning Consult poll, Trump in the Republican primary, Trump is at 60, DeSantis is at 15, and Vivek is at 8. So MAG is at 83 in the Republican Party right now, right? 83% of the primary audience is MAGA, 17% is non-MAGA. And the effort that it's going to take to shake loose and to give the Liz Cheney wing of the party an opportunity to take their party back, whether that can happen in 2025, whether that happens, what the path is, I don't know. But what you have to understand is that in our political system, the Democratic and Republican parties are the only two parties in America by statute and by law. So it isn't going to be easy. It's why it's so hard to set up another party in our system. Whereas in other countries, it's very easy to set up a new party. There's a legal duopoly that exists in the United States between the Democrats and the Republicans. And so I don't know that there's going to be an ability to set up something else. And that's why this fight over the leadership of the Republican Party after this election, if we end up winning by 8 to 10 points, which is my hope and my aspiration, right, is going to be consequential, which is why we need to be building up the Liz Cheney wing of the party, because for the good of the country, we need them to be able to have more influence over what used to be called the Republican Party. And, this is a deeply challenging, your emotion that you spoke to earlier of sadness, a sense of tragedy, a sense of, of danger, right, of threat, because of everything we've just talked about, it's there, right? I mean, one of our two political parties has gone, batshit crazy and has become an extremist and crazy force. And and because we have a two-party system by law, it's really more dangerous than it would be in almost any other country in the world because of that, right? And so, it's why though, Edwin, I've written a piece that I think I talked about last time I was on called Get to 55, where I've challenged the Democrats to try to build a politics that gets us to 55% nationally, up from 51 last time. We win by 10 points, so it's a clear repudiation of MAGA, which would be good for the country, good for us, but also good for Republicans if we can do that.
This conversation opens up the question of why we're a two-party nation is interesting, and some of it's historical accident, but small parties are ideologically pure parties. They pick their thing, that's who they are. We went for big tent parties, in part because we're such a gigantic, diverse nation, right? Instead of having a lot of bickering tribes focusing on one little issue that they care about more than anything else, we said, we'll sort it out in the primaries. We'll figure out how to have a big tent. And we Democrats still have a big tent. I mean, there's an enormous gap between Joe Manchin and Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago, right? An enormous amount of, there are things we share, for sure, but there's big breadth there. The Republicans have, Donald Trump has, MAGA has, narrowed the current Republican Party, where they have an ideological set of, they have a purity test. There's no ideology to it. It's a Trump test. Then you're either in it or you're out. And they've been able to enforce that through the primaries. As you said, 80% of the primary voters are his to do what he says. So it's asymmetric warfare in a way, and very complicated.
Yeah. Well, let me make 2 points to your listeners. Is that one is, we are doing remarkably well, despite everything we just did and the fear that we have. Democrats are not being paralyzed by fear. They're going to work, right? As we were discussing earlier, right? They're putting their head down, they're making the calls, they're writing the postcards, they're giving the money, they're doing the canvassing that we need to do. And, we had an extraordinary election in 2022, despite high inflation and low Biden approval. We actually gained ground from 2020 in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. We got to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55% in Michigan, 54% in New Hampshire. We just got to 56% in Wisconsin, and we just got to 57% in Ohio, right, a few weeks ago. We continue to perform up in the mid to high 50s in the states that matter in this election, which is why I think so much more is possible for us now. And so this strong election that we had in 2022, where we overperformed expectations, we blew it out in the early vote, right? All the things that we did has carried over to this year. And we've had the wins in Wisconsin and Ohio. We had the wins in Jacksonville, Florida, and Colorado Springs, and there was a state house race in Pennsylvania. We continue to perform sort of at the upper end of what's possible. And so I just want to make sure that I want your listeners to know that at the core of where I think things are right now is that I'm deeply optimistic about our chances next year. I'm bullish on Joe Biden and the Democrats, regardless of what's happening with the polling right now, which is very early and I think not really reflective of very much. And I'm very bullish. I would much rather be us than them. And I think that I'm so bullish that I'm trying to imagine a politics where we win by 10 points and not just by 4 or 5. And by the way, if we do that, then all these third-party efforts won't amount to anything, right? And it's why our collective job right now is we've got to continue to amplify and build up the good works of Joe Biden and the Democrats, and to help get his numbers up, get his approval in the economy up. If we do that, if we do 2 things, to me there are 2 big things we need to do in the next 6 months, right? 6 to 7 months. One is we've got to get Biden into a better place. We've got to all collectively go out and sell him to our networks, in any way that we can. And we also need to get very serious about registering young people and pushing youth turnout to the upper end of what's possible. If we can do those 2 things in a meaningful way in the next 6 months, I think it's going to position us very well for the fall elections next year.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I might add a third. We still have to protect. We still have to protect we can register all we want. We have to protect the vote. And there's some pretty serious efforts on the other side to undermine it right now. So I think we have to do that too. But
agreed.
You're capable of doing more than one thing at a time. And it's evident in, with Democrats, things get better, which is one of the things you do. You tell the story of the good work that's being done when Democrats are in charge, and of keeping an eye on the collapse, the disgrace of today's GOP. One of the reasons I was asked by a young person, a person in college, a brilliant young woman who wants to be for Joe Biden, but she says, "Look, I just don't hear, a lot of good stuff about him." And I started to give an answer about, she said, "Why is that?" And I thought maybe it's fragmented press or where she's looking. But then I thought, no, that's not it. There's only so much news time in the world. And this is the first president, maybe ever, whose entire term the news cycle's been dominated by the guy who lost.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so I may change as we start to campaign, but I don't want to pick on the media, even though they love Donald Trump. He breathes, it goes on the front page, or up on, this, because it attracts, it's just interesting to Americans. I don't blame the media for this. And the idea that he's leading an insurrection to destroy the democracy, well, that really is news. It really is. But how do we talk more? And you've got tools for this. How do we get into people's heads the amazing accomplishments of what has truly been, I think, a more impactful administration than President Obama's, than any president I can remember, really, frankly, in the massively good legislation and in the carrying out of that legislation with talent and skill.
I think that, the way I just think about this is that, I worked in the war room with James Carville at Stephanopoulos 31 years ago. It's hard to believe it was that long ago. And I talk about how I think we need to reimagine the war room. That when we think of the war room in our mind's eye, we think of 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bulls, producing TikTok videos, right? Rapid response videos. And the way we need to really think about it is we need to think of it as 2 or 3 million proud patriots network together, amplifying, the good works of the Democratic Party and Joe Biden every day. And let me just walk through the math of that, right? Tucker Carlson, at his heyday, was the most influential commentator in American politics with 3 million viewers a night. Imagine if 2 million people a day reach 10 people in their networks. That's 20 million people. That's a lot more than Tucker Carlson and Fox News reach. And I think that, because oftentimes people will say, well, the Democratic Party isn't messaging well. Why aren't you doing better? And I throw it back at people. I do the JFK line, right, which is not, don't ask what the Democratic Party is doing for you. What are you doing, right, to take responsibility for, not allowing the noisy right to push us around in the daily discourse every day? And I think that we all have more agency in this process than people understand. It's why you have your radio show, Edwin. It's why I have my Substack, right, that we're doing it in our own way. But I'm granting permission today to all of your listeners to become information warriors for their democracy and to do it in whatever way is comfortable. People ask me all the time about this talking points and how do I know? Well, really, in some ways, what you should do is pick an issue that matters to you and get reasonably comfortable in it, right? And then spend time talking to people in your network about that, because I think that we're too reliant on the concept of talking points where we're just sort of spreading stuff that we don't really understand around. I think where real communication happens, where people connect and learn and are influenced, has to also come from passion and knowledge. And that's where we want to get to. And so I'll tell you the story you asked about my Substack. The most gratifying posts that I get on my Substack are ones that go like this, and these are every week, right? Simon, I was at dinner with 3 of my friends the other night, and they were all dumping on Joe Biden and saying he was old and blah, blah, blah. And I used all your statistics that you give us every day, and I turned them around, and by the end of the dinner, they felt really good about Joe Biden, and we had a really pleasant dinner. And thank you so much for giving me the tools to make the case, to persuade my friends and colleagues. So that was 3 people she reached. And imagine if 1 million people are doing that every week. We're more powerful than Tucker Carlson at that point, right? Yep. And I also think that, it creates a relationship for many average folks to their democracy, to the daily discourse that is healthier and more nutritional, right? And where, you feel like you're in this daily debate as opposed to being pushed around by it. And so I think there's so much more that we can do, that we all can do, just regular people. You and I, and when at the end of the day, we're just folks, right? We're just doing, we created these platforms to reach more people, but everyone has a role to play in this. And I think where we've been expert and successful is channeling that kind of energy into campaigns, right? Raising money, building these unprecedentedly large grassroots efforts, which have allowed us to outperform all expectations in recent years. But we need to do a second thing, which is we need to become more intentional about going on offense in the daily information war and not allowing them to push us around as much as they do. And what that means to me, if I can make one last point, is that it's not about doing rapid response. The war room wasn't about rapid response. The war room was about winning the information war every day, going on offense, telling our story. And Democrats have to get better at and spend more time telling our story and not living in their headspace, right? Don't allow their attacks, their, all the things that they do. We have to ignore that stuff more often now and spend more of our time putting positive sentiment into the discourse, responding to their negative sentiment with positive sentiment, and telling our story. We have a powerful story to tell, everyone has a role to play in helping that story be told all across the country. And that's part of the reason, again, when you and I are here today, right, is to help people become more effective patriots, people that love their country and don't want to see democracy and freedom slip away on their watch, you know?
The person in the story you told who went to dinner with her or three friends, those three friends are then going to talk to somebody else. I mean, everybody's got to understand every one of these conversations is a pebble in a pond, and it has waves, right? And I mean, it's just, it's going to take, we live in a networked society now, right? There is no top down, you give a speech, everybody does it. That's not who we are. Everybody's got networks. It's not just technological, it's personal. And that's the only thing at the end of the day that people anymore know to trust, because the rest of it is too strange. So you're doing is,
listen, I just want to put 18 exclamation points on what you just said, right? Which is that in the broadcast age, the television age, the goal was to create couch potatoes, right? Literally, right? Your job was to sit on the couch and consume the media and just keep your ass on that couch, go get popcorn, whatever. In the networked and amplified age, you can take media and take information and share it through your networks. It's a completely different way of understanding the flow of information in our society. Mm-hmm. And, particularly because our coalition is so young, it's incredibly important that we are more active in putting this information into networks. And, I call it networks because it could be an email list. It could be, a Slack group. It could be, a dinner group a book club, right, that you get together with. These are all networks, right, of people. And it's to your point about young people is that we have not been doing a good enough job going and getting our information and our people into their networks. And because and to get young people to become advocates through their communities. When we do that, by the way, the Biden campaign, for example, in 2020 had an influencer campaign where they, created a pool of people who had large following on social media. They educated them. They gave them talking points. They gave them materials which they used to. It was wildly successful. And this is the kind of stuff that has to happen every day, not just in the 3 months before an election, for us to be able to close what I call the loudness gap with the right, with Fox News and all the amplification tools that they have. I really think that we can make enormous strides in this in a very short period of time, and where we don't have to become reliant on Joe Biden himself. I mean, he's been a very good president, but he's going to need some help making his case. And that gives us something to do. Let's get to work. Let's put our head down and go do the work. Absolutely. Right? I mean, that's what's exciting about this election, is that there's a big role for everyone listening today. All of you have a big job to do in this election. And how exciting is that, right?
I mean, when you think back to other eras in our democracy, and you don't have to go back as far as Lincoln, right? But people, the media made us all lazy, right? Because you could hear from the president every day. But most of it, when we were building this democracy, the president was far away, and you might get a telegram, or read something in a paper a week later. The democracy required the people get out and talk to their neighbors and organize to move us forward. And that's back where we find ourselves in a really interesting way. We just organize a little differently, but it's so exciting. As terrible as this threat is we're facing, I keep telling, particularly young people who say, what do I do? You're really lucky to be alive in a time where what you do matters. What you do really matters.
When we come out the other side of this, right, and it's not if, it's when we come out the other side of this, our democracy is going to be renewed and strengthened. And it's one of the reasons, everyone, here's a homework assignment for you, which is we need to help Joe Biden build a big reform agenda. He needs some big agenda to be able to say to the American people that I've been in Washington longer than most people. I know the city. And there are 3 or 4 things I'm going to do before I retire to clean up the mess and the corruption in the city. and make this city work better for the American people. I'm going to strengthen our democracy. I'm going to clean up corruption, whatever the reform agenda, whatever the pieces are. We are in desperate need of something like that as a party, right? We need not just to rely on his foreign policy successes and his economic success and his defense of reproductive health and all the other things that he's doing. We need to be able to go to the American people. He needs to be able to do, a little, particularly because of the issues around his son, right, is that he needs to be able to say, like McCain did after the savings and loans crisis. McCain became one of the most effective reformers of our political system in modern history because of his own troubles. And I think that Joe Biden needs to be able to go to the American people and say, in my second term, I'm going to do something that nobody else could do other than me because of my time and experience and my age allows me to understand what really needs to be done to clean all this up. And I'm going to commit to you that before I leave office in 2028, that Washington will be cleaned up, our democracy will be strengthened, corruption will be challenged, right? All these things. I think this is a big piece that we've got to figure out together because I think it could become very, defining for him. His first term is going to be defined by his economic investments and by his, starting to build a new era, and to build a new era of foreign policy and climate change.
Yep.
Right? The second term, I think, there's going to have to be something that becomes very clear about strengthening our democracy, cleaning up a corrupt political system, blah, 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 which I think would be an incredibly powerful legacy for him.
Yeah. And you and I can both admit that the corruption is not limited to the Republicans. I mean, I live in Illinois. We have, right, it is what it is. And there are many things that reformers, and I've been one my whole life, have talked about that can help. It would be great to have a champion in the White House, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think he wants to do it. It's what I've heard. I just think it's enormously hard. The politics of it is enormously hard, but I think he has to campaign on it, and I hope he does.
Listen, he got more done in his first 2 years than any of us thought he could, right? So we can't count him out. I mean, this is why, I get asked about Biden's age all the time, right? And my answer is, we know that his age is a liability, but it's also an asset, right? I mean, it's allowed him, he's the most experienced person to ever be in the office. His age and his experience and his wisdom. And as somebody like me who's formerly young, right, you know that with age comes experience, wisdom, capabilities that you didn't have as a young person. And
well, I know some old people have never managed to get the memo. But yeah, he's going to be running against one.
But I think in Biden's case, his success is intimately tied in with his age, actually.
I agree with
his age
He's a better president than he would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And his age is actually one of his assets. And I think we have to use that. We have to keep building on that. And he has to use his age and his time here to create this big reform agenda to go out, Anyway, that's just my opinion. People
say, maybe he's fine now, but in 4 years, he might be not in good shape. And I mean, somebody said that to me the other day, and I said, did you watch a Republican debate? Because you may think Biden may not be fine 4 years from now. Was there anybody you saw who you think would be fine 5 minutes from now?
Listen, no. I mean, David Brooks in the New York Times yesterday literally wrote, Joe Biden has been so successful as a president that, I don't care if this guy's 100 years old. If he's delivering these results, I'm for him. This was David Brooks, right? A Republican columnist and it was an amazing, it was a shockingly smart, I was very proud of Brooks for writing that because obviously he was going so against the grain of his own party on that, right? And so, look, I think that, I know we're at the end of our time here, Edwin, and I just want to say, first of all, thank you for what you do, your passion, your commitment, the sort of the high quality discourse that you bring to your listeners. It's a pleasure to be with you. And if I can just, sort of close out here at the very end with just a note of just unrelenting optimism, based on reality, not based on, hopium, right? Based on the fact that we keep winning, we keep outperforming, our grassroots is stronger than it's ever been. Joe Biden, I have this exercise I do when I give my presentations where I'm going to say three things now. Joe Biden has been a good president. The country is better off. The Democratic Party is strong. Period. No commas, no howevers, no buts, no semicolons. These are declarative sentences, and we have to get better as Democrats in speaking in simple, declarative sentences, not qualifying things like Joe Biden's been a good president, but Simon, what about all this stuff? When you do the but, you're doing MAGA's work for them. You're bringing MAGA's arguments into the daily discourse of the Democrats. And we have to get more disciplined about this because Joe Biden has been a really good president. The country is far better off. The investments that we've made in the future are going to keep America prosperous and growing for a generation. The climate investments, to your point, when I get asked about what will Joe Biden be remembered for 50 years from now, he's going to be the guy that may have turned the corner on climate change, right? And
the world is better.
End up becoming, he may be a world-altering historic figure because of the huge investments that we've made in climate. These things will all become more evident to voters as the campaign begins, as the money gets spent, as they get more focused on making their arguments and not just governing every day, right? And it's why I'm deeply optimistic about our opportunity next year. But we have to do the work. And the only way we win now, we know, is not through Joe Biden campaigning well, is that there's millions of people who've got to get up and go do the work over the next 14 months. And if we do that, we're going to have a great election. And so I feel good about where we are, but obviously we got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the amazing resources you make available to people, for the community that you have created and are growing. Look, I have a Substack page, but I can't really figure it out. You've really figured it out. And people should go, you can search for Simon Rosenberg, you can search for Hopium Chronicles. Either way, Substack.com, you find it. It's awesome.
And it's free, by the way. It's free, and almost all of my content is free. I keep it that way. Some people have a lot of paid content. I have very little of my content is paid. So if you subscribe for free, you get access to 95% of the material on the site. And if you want to join at $45 a year, it helps fund, making the site better and more content. But we love free is great. Free is good. And, so anyway, Edwin, thank you so much for the opportunity, and let's, happy to come on whenever you need me. And I'm just really grateful for the sort of thoughtful, serious discourse that you're making available to your listeners. And any way I can support you in your work, just let me know. Okay.
Thank you. I will reach out to you, and we'll do it again. I may reach out to you offline on a couple of things too. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. The remarkable Simon Rosenberg. We're going to take a break for the news. And when we come back, we're going to just focus on a couple of states with this mindset that we now have. We'll go to Iowa next. Stay tuned.